Quiero reconocer que julio es el mes nacional de salud mental de las minorías y queremos agradecerles a todos por estar aquí con nosotros porque vamos a hablar sobre cómo las comunidades tienen retos y las minorías enfrentan enfermedades de salud mental. Quiero dar un poco de números, estadísticas. 17% de los afroamericanos vive con enfermedades de salud mental, 15% de los latinos, 13% de los asiáticos y 23% de las indígenas del norte de América viven con enfermedades de salud mental en Estados Unidos. Entonces, este es un problema que afecta a muchas personas en nuestras comunidades. Quiero presentar a Tiffany Mayers primero.
Tiffany Mayers began her mental health career.
Tiffany empezó su carrera en salud mental como cuidadora de salud y ahora es administradora de la Universidad de Rutgers y también es terapista de tiempo medio. La señora Tiffany es asesora para NAMI-NJ AACT-NOW, que es un programa de alcance para la comunidad afroamericana y es coordinador de la región central. Ella empezó con esta carrera cuidando a un niño con enfermedades de salud mental y ahora está haciendo su doctorado en la Universidad de Kentucky y al igual ha estudiado psicología con una concentración menor en como trabajadora social. Y Carmen Cusido es nuestra segunda ponente y tiene su licenciado en Rutgers University y tiene su maestría de Colombia, la Universidad de Colombia. Y estudiado periodismo y también ha servido como directora para Mike World's Mike, que es una organización de periodismo y también ha trabajado como profesora en Hudson County Community College. También ha trabajado como escritora para varios lugares como en NBC News, CNN, NPR, Cosmopolitan New Jersey Monthly, Oprah Daily. Y también ha escrito sobre relaciones cubo-americanos y en cuestiones de migrantes y anorexia. Quiero empezar la ponencia con la primera pregunta con Tiffany. En mayo celebramos el mes de salud mental de las minorías.
Black, Indigenous, people of color, and why does this matter?
Good
afternoon, everyone. I just want to first start off by thanking you, Jesselie, and the Latino Action Network Foundation for putting together this dialogue because it's very much needed, right? And as you say, we're celebrating Minority Mental Health Awareness Month and talking about the importance of this topic within our own communities. So I would start off with saying it's important to have this conversation because we're dealing with so many challenges. So much is going on and the challenges that we experience impact our mental health wellness. So I'll start a little bit with my own story and then continue to answer your question. So as you said in my bio, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in the field since about 2003 in different capacities, but I don't really think my real mental health journey started until I had to care. I was helping my mother care for my brother who had started displaying some mental health challenges around when he was about the age of 3 years old. So it was one thing to learn about mental health and psychology and all those things from like a school perspective, but it was like a whole different experience and exposure as a person who had to learn to navigate the system themselves from a personal perspective. And, you know, my mom and I, we needed help. And at the time, which was about 20 years ago at this point, mental health was still very taboo of a conversation in the Black community. And even within my family, like I think that there were times when my mother was kind of in denial about whether or not some of the things that the doctors were saying was accurate or was true. So we really needed help navigating like school systems. We needed help understanding how to best provide my brother with assistance rather than reacting to the behaviors that he was exhibiting in school. So at 5 years old, should you be expelling a student or should you be figuring out other programs or other ways of working with him so that way he doesn't exhibit these behaviors? But the stigma behind it all was really the larger hurdle that we had, we meaning my family at the time had, and also we meaning within the Black community and within other minority communities too, right? The stigma of mental health is just something that really keeps us from seeking services, really looking into services, and really believing that there's a need for what we are seeking. So for me and my mom, we went through different channels and had to listen to different people and give input. But then I came across NAMI-NJ. So that's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, because I was searching for, okay, here I am wearing a hat of being somebody in the field, but having to help navigate this world as a newly person in the field, but having to convince older people, my mom and others, about this being the real deal, right? So I did a lot of research and I came across NAMI-NJ, and what I liked about the information I found then was that they had various multicultural programs. So like you said, I'm a part of the AACT-NOW, which is the African American outreach, but they have NAMI in Espanol, which is the Latinx community, CAMHOP, which is for the Chinese community, and SAMHAJ, which services the South Asian community. So being exposed to NAMI and its multicultural programs enabled me to be able to say to my mom, other people are experiencing this as well. And, you know, this is something that doesn't have to be taboo. It doesn't have to be a conversation that we want to avoid. Maybe we can see what others are experiencing. And I think for us meaning minorities and, you know, people in these communities, I think when you can team up and pair up and you don't feel isolated and just outcasted for something that's going on, there's less shame, and then we can begin to eradicate stigma, and then there'll be less stigma around the subject of mental health. So that was back in 2008. I've been a member of NAMI-NJ and AACT-NOW ever since. So I like to start off with telling a little bit about my story, because to me, I am the why it matters, right? Because not only can you know something and can you be able to be that professional and that clinician, but you still have your own struggles. You still have a community of people who you want to engage in. So the why it matters is because our mental health impacts everything that goes on in our lives, right? It impacts our overall health and wellness. So with everything that's going on nowadays, you have COVID, but the numbers keep fluctuating. You have different community killings and shootings in the schools. I mean, it's just so much right now. The list can go on how these things are ultimately impacting our mental health wellness. And I think that there is there needs to be a clearer understanding of mental health and mental illness. And I think that through advocating and through discussions like we're having today, it helps ease people's or ease the stigma around certain things, because we all have mental health, right? It just depends on what's going on with us at the time, whether it's illness or not. So I think that
I wanted to engage because you said so many important things. At first, the intersections of mental
porque hemos hablado
health and
de
mental
diferentes
illness
intersecciones con
kind of
salud mental,
policing it,
y también
schools
viendo
and in the
cómo
community,
se
and how,
afecta a la
people with mental
comunidad
illness are
y en la
often
escuela,
misperceived,
y cómo muchas
right,
personas
as
que tienen
aggressive or
enfermedades de salud
labeled,
mental
right? Even in the
son
context of
agresivas
shootings,
o
right,
son,
of these school
y
shootings,
también el
how often it
contexto
comes up,
de
it's a
tiroteos,
person with mental illness.
porque
And
muchas
really,
veces
like,
dicen,
what is
esa persona
that
tenía
really the
problemas
case?
de
Is that
salud
really
mental.
like, because
Y
so many people
realmente
live
es
with
el
mental
caso
illness and do not commit acts
porque
of
mucha
violence.
gente vive con enfermedades de salud
Can we
mental
raise
y
awareness around that?
no
And
tiene,
being,
hace
a person of
tiroteos.
color, how your brother may have been
También,
perceived very
por
differently,
ejemplo, una persona
and his
que es de una
behaviors of his
comunidad
mental health,
afroamericana como tu
and we
hermano, tal
experience
vez
all
tenía
of that.
diferentes
And I think
perspectivas.
my mom, as the primary caregiver, she also internalized and had different perceptions of how she was being treated for her son being a young Black male versus someone else, their child acting out. Would their child just automatically be suspended from school, or would you have provided other resources for that child? So that's the reason why when you ask, like, why does it matter? It matters for all of these reasons, because there are so many of us in the world who are experiencing mental health and mental illness on different levels and different ways. It's not clean cut. It's not cookie cutter. No one's experience is exactly the same. I'm excited to hear Carmen tell her story in a little while, because everyone's experience is different. So I think for me, I've just made it really my life's mission to go out and spread the word about mental health, the impact of mental health, and why it's important to advocate and bring awareness during months like this. And I just appreciate being a part of the dialogue today.
Thank you. We'd love to hear about, hopefully we'll get to hear more about NAMI's work and efforts, the way that so people can
Muchas gracias. Esperamos que podamos hablar un poquito más sobre el trabajo de NAMI y las diferentes iniciativas. Carmen, una pregunta. ¿Cómo tu experiencia ha influenciado tu promoción de salud mental y cuáles crees que son uno de los retos que las comunidades latinas enfrentan?
Yes,
bueno, primero me pueden escuchar bien.
You know how weather
es
patterns
que
affect
el
everything.
tiempo
So
está,
if I lose
ya
you
saben
guys, I
cómo
apologize.
afecta
I will
todo y
connect by
ahorita
cell
si no
phone.
me escucho o algo me
But Jessley,
disculpo
thank
y
you
bueno
so
me
much for
conecto
the
por el
introduction,
teléfono.
and Tiffany, of course, thank
Bueno,
you for
muchas gracias
sharing
por la
both your personal,
presentación,
little bit of your
Giselle,
personal
y
and
gracias Tiffany por
professional
mencionar
stories.
tu
So a little bit
experiencia profesional
about my
y
lived experiences.
bueno, para hablar sobre mi
So I'm
experiencia
Cuban
con
American,
las
and that does factor
yo
in.
soy cubanoamericana
I was
y eso es
diagnosed
algo que ha influido.
simultaneously with anorexia, had dropped down to 60 pounds and almost died. And with
tuve algunos
depression
problemas con
25 years
anorexia
ago in
y casi
1997.
muero porque había
And
perdido
so I remember being in the
65
eating disorder
libras.
hospital, and while I loved my
Estuve
therapist, she was
internada
great,
en un
we had to
hospital
translate for my dad, right? My mom
desórdenes
and I,
alimenticios
so they were both Cuban exiles
y
who came here
bueno,
when they
mis
were older,
papás
but my dad
eran
was
ambos
significantly older.
exiliados
And so
cubanos. Mi
not
papá
only
era
was there the language
significativamente
barrier
más
where English
grande que
was
mi mamá
very tough for him,
y
but
no
there's
solo
also the whole,
el
what is
inglés era
anorexia?
difícil
Why does
para
my daughter
él,
have
sino
this?
que
What's going on? So it was like
todo este
two-part
tema de que qué es la
translation, almost like
anorexia. Entonces era algo
translating what mental
como
health issues are,
dos
and also
partes de
linguistically, like
traducción, o
your
sea,
daughter's going to
traducir
need medically
lingüísticamente
to stay
y
alive a
además traducir
nasogastric
lo
tube, a
que
tube from my nose down to my stomach. So that was hard.
lo que me estaban diciendo
You know, it took me a few
cuando me
years, but I
internaron y
ultimately
pasaron el tubo
recovered from
a través de mi
anorexia, and I
nariz.
felt
Y bueno,
luckier than most. In the
creo que
sense
en mi
that,
experiencia con la
so
anorexia
I
creo
was
que
working
me
class,
siento
and most of the young
muy
women, and it was mostly young
mucho
women
más fuerte
who
que
were in the
otras
hospital
personas
were
porque
richer.
porque
But
habían muchas otras
because my mother,
personas
may they both
en
rest
el
in peace
hospital
now, but because my mother
que
had been a teacher,
tenían mucho
she
más
had
dinero,
excellent health
pero yo
coverage, and
tenía
so by default,
tuve
I
mucha
had
suerte porque
excellent
como
health
mi mamá
coverage.
era maestra tenía
And it makes me emotional, but one of the things that I think about is how I could overhear the therapists in their offices fighting with insurance companies, like saying these young women need to stay longer. Yes, they're medically stable, they've gained the weight, but they're still eating disordered. Like they still need to stay longer. So in that sense, I was luckier because my insurance was so good that I was able to get more comprehensive treatment, and I think ultimately that may have led to me being able to recover. But I am, one of the reasons I'm very open about my struggle is because I think sometimes people in the Latino community don't recognize, right, that there are mental health issues going on. And, you know, personally, I'm Catholic, I believe in God, but usually what you hear from communities of color and our community, Jessie, is pray about it and it'll get better. And yes, prayer is wonderful, but prayer is not going to, for example, make diabetes go away. Just like it wouldn't make diabetes go away, it's not going to make an eating disorder or depression go away. You need to find the appropriate mental health care. Another reason I'm very open, you know, I consider myself fully recovered from anorexia. I think my last relapse was over a decade ago. And for those who may not know, relapse is when you go back to disordered behaviors. You know, in my case, it was an eating disorder, so it was restricting food or starvation. If somebody struggles with addiction, their relapse might be going back to that substance, for example. But depression is something that I live with and have lived with for more than 25 years. And thankfully, I'm doing well now. But there are times where it rears its ugly head. You know, for example, my mother died of lung cancer in 2019, and I had to quickly shift, not just deal with the grief, but quickly shift from caring for my father, who was at the time he was still alive, he was 14 years older and had dementia. So I had to learn how to be a caretaker very quickly, and I forgot to take care of myself. And thank you to Francesca. One of the articles that I wrote this year was about my suicide, thankfully failed. Suicide attempts 3.5 years ago after my mother passed away. I wrote it for Newsweek, and I think being able to tell these stories, right, helps destigmatize. Like, you know, people like to use the word normal. I hate using words like that, right? Because we all struggle with whatever it might be. It may not be mental health, it may be something else. But I think by putting it out there, you know, saying, hey, I've struggled, but I overcame. And it's not like one point in time, A to B, you're done. It's, I overcame that, but if I struggle
You're breaking up a little bit, Carmen.
Again, here's the sense that sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep,
okay.
you're
I hope
good.
¿Me escuchan ahora?
You're good.
But in any case, to answer your question a little bit, I hope it was a roundabout way, but I think going just briefly back, healthcare is the biggest issue, and if people don't have really good health insurance, that's the biggest struggle I think Latinx families face. Not just Latinx, I think anybody who's working class, you know what I mean? Because there are people who are Caucasian who may not have the best health insurance, who may struggle as well. So I think we need to do a better job of putting money and resources to, like, governments need to do that, companies need to do that, put more money towards health insurance and comprehensive mental health. I think that is the biggest struggle, and honestly, the fact that there still is a lot of stigma associated, that if you say I struggle with depression or I struggle with whatever the mental illness might be, that people look at you differently, you know, and you have to keep reinforcing, I'm just like you, this just happens to be my struggle.
Yo soy como
Thank
tú
you,
también,
Carmen.
y
Your
esta
story
es
is
mi
so
lucha.
powerful, and we really want to thank you.
Muchas
because
gracias,
you are,
Carmen. Tu historia es
the
muy
person who named
poderosa,
this, webinar,
porque tú
right?
eres
I mean,
una
you named this
persona
event,
que
Living and
tú
Thriving with
fuiste la
Mental
que
Illness for a
nombraste
reason. And we
ponencia,
highlighted all of your accolades and
viviendo y
accomplishments
prosperando con salud, con enfermedades de salud
to
mental.
show and to really demystify that stigma
Porque
of someone
queremos
who's
enseñar
very successful
y también
and still living and thriving
eliminar el
with
estigma
mental health conditions. And we really
para personas que
are
tienen
so grateful,
enfermedades de salud
to be
mental.
able to
Y
speak
estamos
with
muy
you.
agradecidas
raised so many
contigo
issues. You talked about
y hablar
language
contigo.
access,
Hablaste sobre el acceso de lenguaje,
cultural barriers in treatment.
barreras culturales en el tratamiento,
mental health conditions through culture, right?
cómo podemos tratar desórdenes o trastornos de salud mental a través de la cultura y también cobertura de salud.
As a healthcare need.
Y también cómo podemos poner en la lista salud mental. Me gustaría hablar un poquito más o escuchar más de Tiffany sobre NAMI y cómo los recursos.
Absolutamente.
As you were talking, Carmen, I'm jotting down notes over here because I'm like, Carmen's right on point with this. So one of the things that you mentioned that I definitely want to reiterate and piggyback off of a little bit is the familial stressors that you mentioned. So you mentioned having to be a child, but still having to help and care for others. And still having the expectation of providing and doing for your family, but kind of forsaking your own mental wellness because of that. And I think that in communities of color, that happens more frequently than we probably want to claim, and more frequently than it should, right? Because that's often, right now as a clinician, I work primarily with young adults through so 25 down to like 5, the youngest. And a lot of challenges that I see in my clients of color are things like that. Like, I'm the big brother and I got to take care of my little siblings, and then mom's at work and those types of things. And it's not to say that I don't see some of that in my my clients that are Caucasian, but I notice, and I just pay attention to it, that a lot of those types of factors go into why some of my clients are presenting with anxiety, because they're feeling like they're not living up to the expectations, or how can they balance it all? I'm so overwhelmed. I have these these demands on me, but I just want to be a kid, those types of things. So I hear that often. So when you mentioned it earlier, I thought it was noteworthy for me to jot down. But back to what you were saying, Justine. So I go into a little bit more detail as far as NAMI and some of the services. What we, beyond just the multicultural, so there's obviously NAMI National, and then each state has its own state office. So within our state office, we have a variety of programs that we do. So we have Sharing Hope, and I mentioned it to Carmen the other day when I talked to her, because Sharing Hope is really an opportunity for dialogue like today, where Carmen would come and kind of tell her story to kind of, like you said, Justine, to get rid of the stigma, to demystify it, to let people know you can be successful and you can have this too, right? Whatever that this thing is, because we all have something. It just depends on how it's presenting for the day, or how, what the last month has been like for somebody. Everyone's just one episode, so to speak, away from some other for some other struggle, right? So we have Sharing Hope. We also have we do a 16-week, I believe it's still 16 weeks, but it might have been cut down during the pandemic. But we do like a weekly family to family course, which basically allows for you to learn about various mental illnesses. So it's kind of like mental health 101, but it's taught from a peer perspective or a loved one. So that was one of the first courses that I took through NAMI when I found them back in 2008, was the family to family course, because I knew the information, but I needed to be able to put it in as much layman's terms as possible for my mother. So that was something that we do. We also go into schools. We pair up with local churches, other organizations like I'm here today. And we do this because we recognize that, yes, there is a boatload of stigma that's attached to mental health, but then there's also just pure lack of knowledge about mental health. And everyone who does not wake up and say, oh, I'm going to go to therapy tomorrow because I'm having troubles, doesn't necessarily not want to go, but maybe they just don't know how to locate a clinician. So NAMI provides that information. If you call our main office, we have a directory. We even have a directory where you can specify, can you point me in a direction of a Spanish-speaking clinician? And we try to keep that information as we find out about it, kind of like in a little directory, so that way we can help people navigate whatever their journey is. So I think Francesca put the website in there for the multicultural outreach, but feel free to poke around. And before we finish today, I'll be sure to give my email. If anyone has any specific questions, I can kind of guide you in the right direction. But I mean, NAMI has a wealth of resources. We try to make all of our resources free to the community. And as we're starting to do more in-person things starting this fall, we will look to have more community engagement. And as you mentioned earlier, Jessie, I'm over the central region, so I try to do events from Union County down through Ocean. So, and that's a few counties in between there, but and our main office is in North Brunswick, so kind of centered in the middle. So, but any other questions, feel free to ask.
That's great. And I think one of the most important aspects of NAMI's work, the national
uno de los aspectos más importantes de NAMI
is that it is founded and led by people with lived experience with mental illness.
Fue creada de personas que tuvieron experiencias con la salud mental, enfermedades y también con seres queridos que tienen enfermedades de salud mental. Yo también soy una trabajadora licenciada clínica.
Have health, right? But you can have something healthy.
Tú también puedes tener salud, pero con estresores y no tener alivio entre esos estresores. Tú puedes abogarte.
So it's definitely true that
y es muy verdad
not
que
like a nature kind of thing, but kind
no
of
es
like a little bit of both all the
algo
time.
natural,
And
es algo poco a poco.
Like we talked about earlier,
que si tienes suficiente estrés, diferentes roles como ser primera generación, una persona de minorías o sin tener apoyo de comunidad. Y NAMI es una buena opción como un sistema de apoyo. La segunda
what are the most important things to keep in mind about
dos.
mental illness? And what are some of the gaps in advocacy around
¿Cuáles son algunas de las brechas
those living with mental illness
que las personas que viven con enfermedades de salud mental viven?
I know it's a couple of three-part questions, but I guess we
Yo
could
sé
start
que
with
son varias preguntas.
Keep in mind.
¿Cuáles son las cosas que son más importantes para mantener en mente?
Yeah, thank you. I can just be brief, only because I see that it's starting to rain, and I'm worried about the internet.
Ya empezó a llover, entonces estoy preocupada sobre el sonido.
Segue,
bueno,
or like a non sequitur, but I promise it makes sense. Earlier this year, two things happened to me that were physically debilitating. One,
me pasaron dos cosas.
I had a bad fall in the winter, and my knee was just in really bad shape, and at some point, I even needed crutches. And a little earlier, late spring, early summer, I ended up having what Justin Bieber has, which is the Ramsey-Hunt syndrome. So I lost ability. I still haven't fully regained my hearing in my left ear, so if I keep leaning in, it's because I'm
y todavía no lo he recuperado completamente.
And I had Bell's palsy with my facial paralysis. I had trouble
tuve
speaking,
problemas de
trouble
parálisis facial,
swallowing solid foods at one point. So not only was that a challenge when it came to mental health, because being physically unhealthy even for a brief period of time was really taxing, not only on my body but on my mind. But the one thing to keep in mind is when we think of mental health, that's like the invisible illness. You know what I mean? When I
la
had
salud mental es como una enfermedad invisible, ¿no? O sea, pero todo lo demás que está sucediendo, o sea, tú puedes ver físicamente lo que sucede, ¿no? Entonces, algunas veces lo que tenemos que tener en cuenta es que, bueno, cuando algún miembro de la familia como que se desconecta, ¿no?
or had been depressed for a while, and then
O
suddenly
alguien que
seems
notamos
happy.
que ha estado
Something's
deprimido
going
por
on.
algún
So the
tiempo.
best thing is to
Algo
maybe
está
approach them and say,
sucediendo ahí
hey, is
con
there
él.
anything
Entonces
going on?
podemos
Is there
acercarnos y
anything I
decirle,
can do
oye,
for
¿estás
you?
bien?
Do
¿Hay
you need
algo que
help
pueda hacer por
finding,
ti?
a doctor,
Podemos
medical professional, that
ayudarte a
kind of
encontrar
thing,
algún
because
doctor,
I feel like
algún
sometimes we
profesional
tend
de
to forget as
medicina
a
que te pueda
society
ayudar.
mental
Algunas
health
veces nosotros
because
como
it's the
sociedad
invisible
tendemos a
illness,
olvidar este
so
tipo
that's
de
something
enfermedades
to
porque
keep in
son
mind.
invisibles aparentemente,
How to
son
build
las enfermedades de
power,
la
I would
mente,
just
¿no?
say
Y tenemos
briefly before I
que,
switch over to
bueno,
my
y
phone,
respecto a
Zoom,
cómo construir
I
el
would briefly
poder o
just
cómo empoderar a
say
la
we
gente,
build power by
diría
having
brevemente
conversations like these,
que
right?
lo
By
hacemos
continuing to
conversando al
put our
respecto,
lived experiences out there, the
hablando
way that
sobre
people are
nuestras
doing with Roe
experiencias
versus Wade, and the way that people are
vividas
doing
y
with
para que
other
las
important
personas
issues.
se
We do that for
puedan
this too, because mental illness has a
relacionar con
face.
estas
These are two
importantes
faces, Tiffany and myself today.
problemas.
But
Por
we are
ejemplo,
among
ahorita
many
tenemos a
people who are either
Tiffany y a
going
mí,
through it
pero
ourselves or
no
have
somos las
family
únicas. Hay
members that
muchas
we're
otras
advocating.
personas que están viviendo y están pasando por esto.
So I'll jump in, Jessica, as well. So Carmen touched upon one of the things I was going to say, and that is really continuing this conversation, right? Like always being prepared and willing to talk about mental health like we would talk about anything else that we have a passion for. It's also about recognizing that, as we all have been saying, we all have or can have something, right? And I think that if we look at it, Carmen mentioned earlier about diabetes. She used diabetes as an example. And I love when people parallel mental health challenges with physical health challenges, because to her point, those are more evident. They are more physical presenting, right? But it does not necessarily mean that they're any more significant just because you can see them. And they all kind of, I have a pen in my hand, I'm going to drop it. They all kind of like blend in together, because if you are experiencing physical health, it does over time, this as a person who has had a number of injuries, a number of surgeries, it does kind of wear down on you. And like that, it starts to impact your mental health at that point, because you're like, oh, when am I going to be done with this? Or why do I always get hurt? And those types of things. So I definitely think that it's important to keep that conversation. But the one thing I want to add on to that is it's important to be proactive as well when we're talking about mental health challenges, or mental health just in general. So I love to tell people that I am a therapist. I faithfully see my therapist every 2 weeks. I feel like, what do you mean you're going on vacation? I need to see you. Because it helps me balance. It helps me maintain balance. So I think sometimes within our communities, we go from either being in denial about mental health altogether or jumping straight to, oh, you want me to be on medication, or you want me to, like these extremes, right? And not to say that not needing to be on medication is an extreme, but in the dialogue of mental health, they're used as weapons rather than resourceful tools. So that's what I mean when I say extremes. And it's really about seeking mental health support before the house falls down. It's really about utilizing therapy as a support system. I mean, when I made the decision to go back to school and work on my doctorate, I talked to my therapist about that. This was a joyous occasion. I was accepted into the university I wanted to be accepted into, but at the same time, this was going to be a life transition for me. It was going to mean I was going to have to tailor certain things that I did in my life. I was going to have to not be able to spend time with family and loved ones like I did. So I still felt it worthy of having that level of dialogue with my therapist, because that was still something important. I think sometimes we see therapy or we hear about therapy and we think it always has to be based on some type of trauma that has happened. It has to be something, catastrophic, something so significant that, I can't get out of bed tomorrow. And yes, those reasons may exist, but But being a young woman who newly married and now pregnant for the first time, that in itself is therapy worthy, because now you're transitioning from not just being a single person, but now you have a partner. Now you have a different lifestyle you're living. Now you're expecting your first child. Are you going to live up to what you think motherhood looks like? These are some of the dialogues that you can have at therapy. And I think sometimes the picture is painted that therapy only looks one way. And I just want to make sure that I share today that therapy is like a coloring book. Pick up crayons and paint it how you color it how you want to. And
love that analogy.
Yeah, and that's just so I think that is what can continue to happen. These types of conversations and talking about changing the narrative and talking about things differently. And then the only other thing I'll talk about, to the point of your question about power, advocacy. Advocacy is power. Us having this conversation today is power, because regardless of how many people are hearing the message today, that many more can hear it if we all go back and then give it to someone else. And we share resources, just like in most communities of color, at least I know. In the Black community, there's a pride about congregating and coming together, whether that's in places of worship or family reunions, different types of platforms. And so I look at mental health and the conversation surrounding it similar to that. Like, if one person knows something, the whole village can know it, right? And then that way we are able to expand more and more, and we can really eradicate the negative connotation that mental health carries, because we all can benefit from it, whether it's something that's personally affecting us or our loved ones or our children. It's affecting us at the end of the day. Our communities are hurting right now because we're not addressing the real elephant in the room, which is our mental health wellness and the reasons why we have these angst about seeking help.
Can I just quickly piggyback off what Tiffany said,
continuar con lo que dijo Tiffany?
Yes, perfect. So something that stood out is,
bueno, algo que
I love seeing my therapist every week. It's like one of my favorite times a week,
yo,
honestly.
Cuando veo a mi terapeuta cada semana, o sea, es de mis momentos favoritos de la semana. Y bueno, esto es algo...
I was used to doing things for 3 decades of my life,
and
it wasn't necessarily healthy. It's just whatever coping mechanisms I had learned. You know, listen, none of us is perfect. Each of us in our lived experiences has some trauma, or may not. In my case, my father had a lot of trauma that was unprocessed, and it was kind of foisted onto me. And I realized that a lot of the ways that I was doing things in my life outside of parental and familial relationships was really as a way to not upset anybody and to not kind of make waves, so to speak, because I knew that my dad would be really upset and that the ire would be terrifying and that I would just, I wouldn't want to deal with it. And I realized that I had no real assertiveness skills because I didn't know how. And when I first started becoming assertive, it was absolutely terrifying for me. And I was always afraid, you know, oh my gosh, like what kind of repercussions is this going to have? And when I realized, you know, the people in your life who are important in your life, even if you're assertive and you set healthy boundaries, the folks who themselves are learning healthier coping mechanisms, they will understand and respect that. And that doesn't mean, I mean, I've lost some people in the last couple of years, but I have found in my own life that the people who are left behind are the more meaningful people in my life. And yes, it was scary and it's still scary to be assertive, but it's absolutely important. And in the process, I've learned a lot more self-respect and I've become stronger. And all of this I've learned through therapy and through my therapist, who's been really a godsend. And one last thing that I'll say about that is find a therapist who works for you, because it really is like dating. I've had therapists in the past that there was no real connection. And when I found Sarah, I mean, she has just helped me in so many ways recognize why my patterns have been what
demasiado para poder aprender a qué es lo que he estado pasando y como a desmantelar todo esto.
To that point, Jesselie,
Yes.
or do you want to move on to the next? Okay.
No.
Because that's so important, what you just said, Carmen, about finding a therapist that works for you. So as we've been talking, I've been telling you about me wearing multiple hats. So I'm kind of the caregiver, but I'm also a clinician. And I think what you just said is so key. And I'm never offended when I meet a new potential client and we both kind of realize that maybe you'd be better served over here with someone else. Or when I'm working with a client and they get to a certain age and then maybe they like, because again, I work with the little ones, right? So once they get to like puberty age, they're like, oh, maybe I would need a male client, Miss Tiffany, those types of things. And therapy really is about you finding someone you can connect with, and you should want to go to therapy. Like you say, Carmen, I don't know what I would do if I didn't go. And you should feel that connection, but you should also feel like it's working for your needs. Now, that's not to say that therapy is always going to be a walk in the park. At every session, you're going to go home and you're going to be like, yay. No, sometimes you're going to cry. Sometimes you're going to probably hate the fact that your therapist spent 15 minutes on one subject about something that you didn't really want to talk about. But the point is that person is creating a safe space for you to be vulnerable and to be able to open up and have a dialogue. I talk when I'm out and about having outreach meetings, I say all the time, a therapist can only help someone who's willing to share the information, though, because I'm with you 1 hour a week at most, maybe every 2 weeks. If you don't come to me, Carmen, with what you really need to tell me, then I could think that you're doing great and everything is going dandy and those things. So it really is a relationship. It's a therapeutic relationship, and you really do want to be able to entrust and bring things to your therapist and feel that they are bouncing off of your ideas as well and working together with you to navigate your journey. It's not going to be easy all the time, but it should definitely feel like there's some connection there and some magic is happening. I love when I feel the magic happening as a clinician. So, but I agree with you on that one, Carmen. So I just wanted to jump in for that.
Bueno, por eso estoy de acuerdo contigo, Carmen.
That was, yes, that's quite, so I'll add, I'm also in psychotherapy.
Yo también quiero decir que también estoy en terapia, soy psicoterapista, cualquier cosa que tiene que ver con el trabajo.
I find it very important as part of like my structure.
Siento que es muy importante, que es parte de mi estructura. Voy al gimnasio, camino ciertos pasos al día. Ese es el momento que pienso lo que está pasando en mi vida.
And
gracias
we're
por
wrapping up.
compartir.
I want to make sure I open it up for some questions and the last
Quiero
couple minutes, and I
abrir
do want to include some resources.
Para el público,
I just
si
also
quieren
wanted to
hacer
share,
preguntas,
for me,
también quiero compartir
National
que
Minority Mental Health Awareness Month or
que
BIPOC
el
Mental Health
mes
Awareness Month
de
is so important.
conciencia
To
para
me,
la
it's
salud
that,
mental de
like,
las
one of
minorías
this
es
heart,
tan
at the heart of
importante
advocacy,
y
because
siento que es el
one of
corazón
the
de la
functions of
promoción
oppression
porque
is to
siento
instill
que
fear. And one of
una de
the
las
functions
funciones de
of the way
operación
racism and all
es
the isms have worked
mantener a la
in the
gente
United
con
States
miedo
is to
y
instill
siento que eso es
fear and to really
algo
dehumanize us and not
que
make our
en
struggle seem
racismo
worthy,
sistemático en Estados Unidos
and
es
kind of our
mantener a
fault,
la gente
right? It's your
en
fault.
miedo
And in
y
reality,
también en salud
the
mental
mental health
lo
system
hacen
has
como
been used
para
in the
que es la
past
culpa de las
against
personas
people of
y
color,
siento que la salud
to kind
mental
of label
en el pasado
behaviors that were
ha
a function
sido
of the oppression
utilizada
that they were living
como
in. So
opresión.
I at the same time, I want to dispel myths. I understand the fears that people really have
Entiendo los
about
miedos de
seeing
la
a
que la gente
provider
tiene
and kind of being
para ver
stigmatized
un
or
proveedor
being,
o
experiencing
tener estigma
bias
si utilizan
directly,
los
or just
servicios
racism,
o tener
or
prejuicios o
discrimination
racismo
very
o
upfront.
discriminación.
But finding ways to overcome that fear, finding
Pero
programs
buscar
that
maneras
reflect
de
your community,
romper
and that
esas
feel in community, that
barreras
don't feel so
y
kind of forced, you know.
Y no sentirse forzada. Creo que va a hacer gran diferencia.
Yes, faith-based services
y trabajando con organizaciones
de for mental health, but it's a great support
religiosas.
So just finding ways
no
to
va a curar la salud mental, pero sí va a ayudar.
Despite our fear. Because that's really how we
creo que esto nos va a ayudar a platicar sobre nuestros miedos a través de la terapia y realmente hablar sobre los problemas que vemos en la comunidad. Y creo que es muy valoroso y muchas gracias a las dos por compartir. No sé si alguien más quiere compartir algo más.
Oh, I think that you put it together well, that it really is. And, you know, as you mentioned it, I'm thinking of papers that I'm writing right now, because this is what my research is on. And it really is about eradicating stigma, but still recognizing the systemic oppression and all the isms that you mentioned that have played a legitimate role in why people are reluctant on seeking services. And I think that we can continue having these dialogues to let the community know that we are women who attend therapy. We are advocates in the community for mental health services and just the conversation in general. But we are also working to break down those barriers that systemic oppression has placed before us, because we're not, just because we're saying go to therapy doesn't mean I'm saying go to therapy and not recognizing the fact that you may have a hard time finding a therapist depending on what type of health insurance you have. I'm just saying that it's still worth you pursuing it, but with organizations like NAMI and other organizations that exist, there may be avenues that you can have some type of ease to be able to navigate, or a friendly face to help you navigate it, because some of that is our own internal fear that you were discussing. So it's like, I don't even know what to say when I call. So in NAMI, we're peers, so someone is there, and if you want to make that phone call today for the first time, I will stay with you on the phone while you make the call, or I'll be in the office, you just knock on the door if you have any questions for me, like that type of thing. So I definitely appreciate you recognizing that these challenges do exist for a real reason, but we're still saying that let's continue to still receive what we need while we're still working on getting rid of these challenges.
There is power in saying there is something wrong with me and I have been affected by the experience.
Hay mucho poder en decir algo me pasó y me han afectado. Creo que hay mucho poder y fortaleza, y espero que la gente que está escuchando, y yo creo que Carmen y Tiffany tienen gran poder, han podido utilizar sus experiencias y fortalecer. A veces lo más difícil es admitir que algo está pasando en nosotros y demandar los servicios que necesitamos.
¿Puedo decir algo?
In terms of that, Jesselie, also important for anybody listening that it's about you. So whatever it is that you're doing when you're seeking help, it's about you and your quality of life. Because unfortunately, there are some unhealthy dynamics in families. I've experienced that in my own extended family now, where sometimes where you begin to become assertive or begin to kind of step into your power, that other people feel threatened, right? Because sometimes, even if something is unhealthy, it's what we know. Right, and then when somebody starts shaking that ground a little bit, it's like, uh-oh, what does this mean for the rest of us? You know, so it's important. People might try to guilt you. People might try to make you feel a certain type of way for going to therapy or for doing something for yourself. It's important to keep reiterating to yourself, this is for me, this is for my quality of life.
Thank you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
I'm going to open it up for any questions. If there's any questions, you can,
Otra vez, el foro está abierto para cualquier pregunta. Si quieres, también lo pueden poner en el chat. Les voy a dar un poco de momentos para que escriban sus preguntas.
I'm not seeing anything coming up.
No veo nada.
Okay.
Okay.
So, thank you, Carmen.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Carmen y Tiffany, por estar aquí con nosotros con esta discusión tan importante. Vamos a seguir avanzando la salud mental. Empezamos esta serie el año pasado y estábamos hablando mesas redondas sobre las comunidades afroamericanas y también latinas para hablar sobre los retos y también crear leyes, agendas de leyes o pólizas. Por ejemplo, pudimos incrementar acceso a departamentos psiquiátricos bilingües.
Putting people in the room and using your voice
can work. Hemos demostrado que poniendo gente en un lugar y compartir ideas sí puede funcionar. Esos son nuestros reportes. Y Francesca lo ha puesto en el chat. También quiero subrayar sobre la salud mental de los afroamericanos, que la línea del 988 ahora está disponible. Este es un esfuerzo muy importante y queremos saber cómo está funcionando y cómo no está funcionando y cómo lo podemos mejorar. Esta línea puede reducir también el crisis, especialmente cuando tiene que ver con experiencias no tan buenas con la policía, especialmente cuando las personas han sufrido ese crisis. ¿Cómo funciona? Hablas para personas que tienen crisis, si la gente se siente atrapada, una persona van a hacer una evaluación muy básica y de ahí van a determinar qué tipo de servicios van a necesitar dependiendo en la evaluación. Entonces quiero subrayar esto, por favor. Está disponible en diferentes idiomas. También tiene interpretación simultánea para que tú puedas tener acceso a terapia de crisis sin tener miedo de que haya consecuencias con la policía. Otro evento que vamos a tener este mes es la salud mental de los latinos, los hombres latinos. Queremos hablar sobre las luchas y las experiencias únicas que las personas o los hombres de comunidades de diferentes afro-indígenas o latinas experimentan. Una de las preguntas es, ¿cuáles son los pensamientos de los ponentes aquí sobre la nueva línea?
Start with my thoughts. I definitely am a supporter of it. I think what
yo estoy de acuerdo en favor de esto.
Provides is an opportunity for resources to be put there, to be provided, and there not be as much of a stigma behind making that call. I used to do a lot of work in homes, and I know that one of the challenges that the families always talked about was if they did have to call mobile support or they did have to call the police. And we talk about this at NAMI too. You don't know if you're getting someone who's really mental health AIDS certified and really understand what they're walking into. So I think the opportunity of 988 provides that. I also think that it allows for someone, to Carmen's point earlier about maybe you want to seek help, maybe you want to talk to somebody, but your family's kind of making you feel like, oh, well, why would you want to do that or that type of thing? You making this call, it doesn't have to be broadcasted to everybody, right? And this allows you to have a more of a personalized dialogue with someone who can then provide you with resources as to where to go next. So I'm definitely a support for NAMI-NJ.
Por eso, yo
What do you
estoy en
think,
favor
Carmen?
de ese tipo de servicio.
Yeah, I piggyback everything
Yo
that
también
Tiffany
secundo todo
said.
lo que dijo
I would also add that
Tiffany,
it's
y
just a
además
quicker
quiero
number.
agregar
It's like,
que
when you think of
como
911, it's like a quick number,
cuando
you know,
piensas
so the
en
same
el
now with
911,
988, because I know
también
that
el
the former
988
number was like really
es un
long
número rápido,
and hard to
porque el
remember. And
número
if
que
you're in a
estaba antes era
crisis,
muy largo
you know,
y
you want to get to someone
difícil de
quickly.
recordar, y entonces
So
cuando
I
estás en
think it's
una
wonderful.
crisis quieres contactar a alguien rápido, entonces es
Last
maravilloso.
question, where can we follow you and your work?
La última pregunta es, ¿dónde podemos seguirlas a ustedes y
So if
también
it's
su trabajo?
helpful, I can put it in the chat so that
Yo voy a ponerlo en el
when I
chat.
say it, people aren't trying to write it down. So I'll put it in
para
the
que no
chat, but
tiene
I'll
que
give
escribir,
you
cuando
NAMI's.
escribo.
We're on
Pero
Facebook and
también
Instagram.
NAMI está
I'll
en
give you the
Facebook y
website, and
Instagram.
then I'll also give
Yo
you
le
my
voy
mental health
a
team
entregar el
page,
sitio de web
as I do a
y
lot
la
of
página
advocacy and those
donde
types of
se
things
puede
through my
recibir
platforms as
la
well.
sensibilización.
For me, it's really
Yo,
easy.
es
My
muy
LinkedIn
fácil,
is my name. You can
LinkedIn
find
es
me
mi
pretty
nombre, me pueden
quickly,
encontrar
Carmen
bien
Cusido.
rápido como
And
Carmen
then in
Cusido.
terms of social
Y
media, at Twitter,
en
it's,
redes sociales,
on Twitter,
tengo
it's
Twitter,
at Carmen Cusido,
es
so my full name.
@Carmen
And
Cusido, es mi
on
nombre
Instagram, it's
completo.
at
Y en
C
Instagram
Cusido, so
es
first initial, last name.
C Cusido y la primera inicial de mi apellido.
I don't see any other questions.
No veo otras preguntas en el chat o en las preguntas y respuestas.
Thank you, Carmen.
Muchas gracias, Carmen. Bueno, felicidades por estar en Oprah Daily. Vi tu artículo ahí. Wow, increíble.
Gracias. Gracias.
They don't exist. That's really impressive.
Es muy impresivo.
Good luck on your
Tiffany,
doctorate
buena
program.
suerte en tu doctorado. Yo lo completé.
It's over.
Ya casi cuando
where I
piense,
am right now. I'm
casi
like
llegas al
waiting
final.
for May 2023 to get here.
You will get there. You will get there.
Ya vas a llegar ahí.
Thank you. I put the two links in there. So NAMI-NJ AACT-NOW, and then also mental health team for both Instagram and Facebook.
Facebook y Instagram.
Carmen, did you want to say something?
Carmen,
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm on my phone, so it's hard for me to type into the chat, but Jessie, if anybody's asking, you know, you can certainly share my information.
Francesca, ayúdame y siéntete
Sure,
libre de
we
compartir
will
mi
email. We will
información.
also be sharing. So we're recording and we'll be sharing this on our YouTube channel.
De hecho, estamos
LANF
grabando
Foundation,
esto, lo vamos a poner en nuestro YouTube
You can
channel.
look us up and subscribe.
Nos puedes
and watch
encontrar
our
en
past
YouTube.
events on there.
También
This
puedes
event will also
ver
be translated and available in Spanish.
eventos del
for
pasado.
sharing in the
Esto va a estar disponible en español para compartir con la comunidad. Y también vamos a incluir los links que mencionamos hoy y especialmente los recursos que hablamos hoy.
Well, thank you again for having us today and for continuing this very needed conversation within our communities. So hats off to you all for organizing this.
Saludos a todos.
Yeah, thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you guys. We really
Gracias.
appreciate it. So,
Mucho,
and thank you the
apreciamos
audience for
todo.
joining us. Thank you
Y
to
gracias
our
al
team.
público por
There's some
estar
people
con
in the background that
nosotros.
you're probably only seeing in the
Yo
chat.
sé
They are
que
key to this.
tal vez no
They
vistes
pulled
a
it
la
all
gente que está en el
together.
fondo,
Francesca
a gente
Baroni, our policy
clave que
director,
hizo ayudar
and
a este evento,
Ramos, who is
a
our
Francesca,
health
que
justice
fue
coordinator.
nuestra
And we also
asesora
wanna
de
thank
póliza,
our
y
interpretation and
también
translating
Sari,
team that
y
will be
también
working to
queremos
make this accessible to the Latino
agradecerle a
community,
nuestra
Nayeli Salazar and her
organización
great
que nos está
team.
ayudando con la
So thank you all
interpretación,
for
Nayeli
joining
Salazar
us. Please
y
stay
su
tuned to our
equipo.
next event next week at 12 p.m.
Por
on
favor,
Latino mental
vamos a
health.
ver
And we really
el
appreciate
próximo
you all for
evento, que es el
coming.
próximo, la
Self-care,
próxima semana a las 12.
take light and just
Cuidado de sí mismo,
best, right?
y
I always say
haz
we're
todo lo
all
que
doing the
puedas.
best we can with what
Nosotros
we have
estamos
at the given
haciendo,
time. That's the message
estamos
I always
todo
give.
lo posible con lo que tenemos
So
en
there's
este
no
momento.
shame in
Entonces no
if
hay
times you feel
vergüenza
like you don't have
si
everything
a
that you
veces
need.
no tienes
Just know that
todo
there's support out there to
en
reach
control.
out. There's a now the 988 number. NAMI-NJ
Ahora tienes el
is an
número.
excellent resource.
También
And there are
NAMI Nueva
ways
Jersey
to,
es un
access services
recurso
in the community
fantástico
and people who can help.
y
So
es
hopefully we reach
un
out and
apoyo
that
muy
works.
muy bueno.
Thank you all.
Espero que nos ayuden. Gracias a todos.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Muchas
Bye.
gracias. Bueno, bonita tarde.
Ya se fue un gran tarde todos.
Ok.